I love found footage, but good found footage films are so hard to come by, and that seems to be because they're always fighting an uphill battle. On top of making a normal movie where your audience this day and age is always checking for plot holes and inconsistencies, found footage films have the additional problem of the audience constantly asking the question, why? Why are they filming this? Why do these characters act this way? All valid questions to be asking. Found footage films are constantly trying to justify their own existence to the audience, and that leads to people's immersion being broken very, very easily. But I believe that when a found footage film works, it can be one of the most terrifying horror experiences. And you don't have to look very far for examples of this. Oftentimes, the most disturbing parts of non-found footage films are when we switch from a normal perspective to a found footage one. Think the 8mm sections from Sinister, or even a non-horror example like the Joker's torture scene from The Dark Knight. Both are incredibly effective at disturbing the audience, so naturally expanding that experience into a feature should create one of the scariest movies ever. Well, history has shown that that's not necessarily true. Found footage is often considered the lowest form in horror, yet at the same time has spawned some of the most profitable and iconic films, so how does that work? The most successful found footage horror films in my mind work by shutting down the questions running through the audience's mind as much as possible. Wreck, for example, justifies its characters filming their horrific scenario to expose what's really going on in the apartment complex once they're locked inside. And as stated before, the reason they don't just leave is because they're locked inside. And as for why after a certain point they don't just put down the camera actually has a good amount of utility. It has a light and night vision, so they really wouldn't want to drop it or put it down. With that and a well-written plot and good acting, Wreck elevates itself above your typical found footage fare. But that's a video for another time. And in the found footage world, there is one specific film that I think has almost perfected this type of horror. And I want to take a look at what makes it such an effective found footage horror by looking at one specific scene and the build-up to it. I'm Nightmare Movies, and today I want to talk about South Korea's 2018 masterpiece, Gonjiam Haunted Asylum. Gonjiam is a film that wastes no time, which is already refreshing for this genre. It establishes the main antagonist of this film in a quick sequence following two boys investigating the asylum, and more specifically, the infamous room 402, a room that cannot be opened and the source for all the paranormal activity. The video apparently shows the last known footage of the two boys before they went missing, and the person relaying this information is the host of the Horror Times Terror Squad, a group of paranormal investigator YouTubers that are trying to make their way down the list of the 7 most haunted places in the world. And you can guess where their next stop is. But before we can travel there, we're going to be introduced to the rest of the cast. In total, the crew of Horror Times is 3 men, 3 women, and our host, Ha-jun. Introduced quickly, effectively, and never feeling like we're just watching unnecessary scenes to pad the runtime. Like I said, Gonjiam is an efficient movie. By the time we hit the 14-minute mark, the group has already been introduced and have set up base camp outside of the asylum. The plan is that Ha-jun is going to stay in the tent and live stream the investigation of the asylum. This is also where we get an extremely creative and important choice for this film. Instead of the usual single camcorder perspective, each of the characters has 2 GoPros attached to them, one facing their face and one facing the direction they're looking at. And these cameras simply aren't strapped onto the characters with Velcro. They're screwed on tight with wrenches to ensure that they don't fall off or get taken off when they get scared. Some of the group do carry camcorders, and they've also set up cameras in different rooms of the asylum, giving us a ton of different perspectives on the situation. With this elaborate setup, the group makes their way into the asylum, and this is where the tension starts to build. Quentin Tarantino describes suspense as a rubber band, something you want to stretch as far as possible. At minute 25, the group enters the asylum and begins their investigation. But the scene I want to discuss with all of you doesn't truly start until over an hour into the film. And part of what makes it so effective is these 35 minutes in between. You see, for those 35 minutes, we aren't just meandering around the asylum with nothing going on. And if you've watched any other found footage film, you know exactly what I mean. The film bombards us with information about the asylum, and it also gives us a number of different paranormal experiences and setups that are going to be paid off later. For example, doors close on their own. The group finds different objects that are related to inmates of the asylum, specifically this doll that's going to come into play later, and this all culminates in a psychic ritual that the group performs. Across the ceiling, almost like a web, these long red strings with bells attached to them are hung up. And this is where we get the most overt paranormal activity up until this point. After performing the ritual and calling out to the ghosts that inhabit the asylum, the strings begin to violently shake. The bells fall off and the whole group runs out of the room screaming. As I said, up until this point, other than a door slamming shut, there hasn't been anything to this degree of paranormal activity. And at almost exactly the halfway point, we get a twist in the story. It turns out that Ha-Jun and 2 other members of the crew have set up things like this ritual as hoaxes to bait viewers and the reactions of their co-stars. They supposedly have more set up to scare particularly their female co-stars, and this is where, as a viewer, you're probably thinking that the last little while has been redundant and a waste of time. But that's not entirely true, because after this reveal, something genuinely unexplainable happens. Inside the base camp, the propane stove randomly ignites on its own, and once Ha-Jun puts it out, the power gets shut off in the tent. And that's all that's needed to lay a seed of doubt in our minds. With that seed planted, and for the next little while, all the audience is waiting for is the inevitable to happen. Something truly paranormal. And this is what happens. The group, who for the most part are already on edge, get led into a room where some patients were detained in these large wooden boxes with square holes cut out of them. In this room, one of the men plans to stick his arm in the hole and pretend like he's being grabbed by something. And when he does just that, it goes just as planned. The rest of the group is terrified, so to bait in more viewers and reactions, he goes to stick his hand back inside. But with only half of the group in on the hoax, the uninformed members beg for him not to put it back in. This is when a fight breaks out about who should put their arm in, and eventually one of the girls, Ji-Hyun, decides to do it instead. The men who are in on it both try and stop her, knowing that it might blow the whole show for everyone, but it's too late. She sticks her arm inside, and everyone, including us, waits with bated breath. Now here's where this movie's brilliance really lies. I said earlier that immersion is a key factor in found footage horror working, and part of that immersion in my mind is buying what the characters do. Now if you or I were in this situation that Ji-Hyun is in, what would be your first instinct? I'm guessing that it would be something along the lines of leaving right now, and that's exactly what she does. Ji-Hyun and Charlotte both leave the asylum in a panic, and this is the point in the story where nothing is held back. At this point, everyone has undeniable proof that something paranormal is happening, but what the spirits are capable of, we don't know yet. The scene starts like this. Ji-Hyun and Charlotte are now both outside of the asylum, making their way back to base camp. After walking through the woods, the two discover, through a mark that they left earlier, that they've been walking in circles this whole time. Almost immediately after, Charlotte discovers that the ground is littered with equipment from the asylum's lab room. Confused and concerned, she tries to talk to Ji-Hyun, but something's wrong. Ji-Hyun faces the opposite direction, unmoving and unresponsive. As Charlotte approaches her to see what's wrong, Ji-Hyun is possessed by something and Charlotte makes a run for it. The entire time she's running, we hear Ji-Hyun right behind her, chanting in that same incoherent way. Charlotte finally finds her way to the safety of the tent and hopefully of her host, but just as she opens it, she's teleported into the empty interior of room 402. Well, at least what she thinks is empty. Charlotte shines her flashlight into one of the corners and Ji-Hyun stands there, silent once again. She looks down and finds the same doll from earlier right next to her feet. And suddenly, this pale, lanky man now stands in front of her, unmoving. Charlotte nervously scans the room and finds that a door is just on the other side of it. She slowly makes her way towards it, but as she does, quietly, she tries to twist the doorknob, but it's not opening. Everything kicks back into overdrive, ending with Charlotte getting dragged into the darkness. On its own, it's an effective scene, but the question to answer is why? And to do that, I want to go back to my original points. The problem I originally stated with found footage horror was that the audience is questioning the reality of the film way more than usual. But what makes Gonjiam such an effective horror is how it quells any doubts the audience might have in such an effective manner. And it is all encapsulated in this one scene. The first thing everyone asks is, why are they filming this? The answer has two parts. Firstly, we establish in the very first minutes that this is a crew simply looking to livestream their encounters in this building, so that is the literal reason why they're filming. But the second and more important answer is because they have no other choice. Early on, I mentioned how these cameras are essentially bolted to each person, and they're extremely difficult to get off. Unlike a lot of other found footage films, the characters can't just drop their cameras and run away when things go south. It's something they're stuck with, and if I was in a situation like this, I don't think I'd take the time to get all of that off me. Now, the other question I find myself asking is, why are you doing that? I think, again, other found footage movies struggle to have their characters make rational decisions, especially when things start to go wrong. I wonder, why don't they just leave? Let alone, why do they keep filming? I already gave a reason for why they keep filming, but as for why they don't just leave, well, they do. In that 35-minute section I'll call Act 2 for simplicity, our characters never really encounter anything overtly hostile towards them. The most paranormal experience that the group knowingly has is a door slamming on its own. And when we get to the point where the group performs a ritual and bells begin to fall on them, it's revealed that some of the group is faking the activity. Even then, this isn't something dangerous. I can suspend my disbelief that the characters not in the know were convinced to stay. But when something violent and completely unexplainable happens, when Ji-yoon gets attacked, they do what everyone would do and leave. I also want to go back to Tarantino's point about tension. If we put this scene in the world of any other horror movie, the scene goes something like this. Once Charlotte and Ji-hoon leave the asylum, everything would play out in the exact same way, up until... As soon as this reveal happens, Charlotte would have been killed off and we'd move on to the rest of the group. Feel familiar? But Gonjiam does exactly what you should do. It stretches the moment. And with this tight claustrophobic perspective, and the scene being stretched as long as it possibly can, we're locked into the horror. And after this point, the hostility from the spirits never stops. And that's the last thing I want to mention. Gonjiam isn't just great in how it perfects found footage tropes, but also tropes of paranormal movies. Another why that isn't just applicable to found footage is, why does the demon or bad guy just stop? I know we've all seen this happen in a movie. 20 minutes in, a ghost or spirit possesses someone or does something that actually physically hurts the characters, and most of the time, it's used as the inciting incident for the rest of the movie. And all I wonder is why the demons suddenly stop trying to hurt the characters. What Gonjiam does so well is that once the actual threat is introduced, it does not stop being a threat until the end of the film. I mentioned this same idea in my 28 Weeks Later video. I equate horror with danger, and Gonjiam is another example of this idea. Now, I absolutely love this film, and I highly recommend that you watch it. This is one of my favorite scenes in horror, and it's so well done. Even if you don't like found footage, I still say give this one a shot. And with all of that being said, thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe. And I'm Nightmare Movies, and I'll see you all next time.